From TLDR News, this is Too Long Didn't Read. This podcast is made possible by our backers over on Patreon. Not only does their support make it possible for this show to exist, but we also give them an exclusive bonus section of the podcast every week. If you want to check out what you can get in return for supporting us on Patreon, head over to patreon.com/TLDR News. Welcome to another episode of Too Long Didn't Read. I'm Jack, and joining me today is Zach.
Hello.
Bad timing with your
Yeah,
coffee
I
there.
know, that was terrible timing.
And Ben.
Hello.
We've got a bunch of topics to discuss this week. We're going to try and be a bit more structured with the podcast from now on. Slight new format. We'll be interested what you think of it. But where should we start? Anyone got a strong opinion of where you want to start?
What do you think is the most important thing? What do you think?
There's a lot of important
Yeah,
things.
exactly.
Should we start with Corona?
I feel like it's
seems
hard. It's hard to
yeah.
argue that Corona isn't the most important thing.
Just how dangerous is the coronavirus?
Well, we've got a clear strategy for dealing with coronavirus.
Now the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. But we're very, very ready for this, for anything, whether it's going to be a breakout of larger proportions or whether or not we're at that very low level.
Anyone got any amazingly insightful thoughts about coronavirus?
I got some stats. If we're going to start with
Yeah,
some
stats is
Some
always a
stats.
good start. Let's do that. Yeah.
So looking at the total cases so far, we've been talking quite a lot about the death rate and the fact the death rate has been floating around 2-3% depending on what you're counting.
Yeah.
So generally people have been saying that means that it's not that serious for most people. But looking at a kind of deeper breakdown, 80% of cases so far have been mild, and those are people who need to be persuaded to stay home. They just need to self-quarantine.
Yeah.
They'll probably be fine. 15% require hospital treatment of some kind, and 5% are people who require intensive care. And obviously of that 5%, about half will die from it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the breakdown at the moment, that still the vast majority of cases are relatively mild. And
that's supposed to be why it's so hard to contain, isn't it?
exactly.
Yeah.
Because if it was something like Ebola, where the
You're not
death
going
rate...
to Tesco's with Ebola.
Exactly. You'd know you'd have it and you wouldn't be spreading it. And then that 5% of people who are more vulnerable, the older people, the people with ongoing issues, are the people who are going to suffer more in this.
Yeah.
I got more stats.
You've got more
If you're done,
stats?
I've got more stats.
We got any personal anecdote?
Yeah, I'm meant
Go
to be
on.
going
Go on.
to Italy in
Here
a
we
few
go.
months. So
Why are you going-
I'm
how
doing
come
a
you're going to
European
Italy?
road trip. I was meant to be doing a European road trip in
course,
Italy.
Yeah.
So it'd be sort of northern Italy that we were looking at going to. So we were meant to be booking. We've delayed booking it for this exact reason.
I actually had the exact same thing. I booked flights to Rome a couple of days before the coronavirus hit Italy.
Really?
I would
Oh,
have been,
right.
Oh, they're so cheap now. They're so cheap.
Yeah, that's a good point. When are you
Yeah,
going?
June.
I mean, you'll probably be okay.
Yeah, I'll be
That
fine.
feels far enough
Oh,
away.
That is technically someone's birthday present, so
Oh,
just beep out the word of the place. Oh,
I mean, you
fuck,
still
this is
ruined it.
Yeah,
We're going to have to
okay.
cut that out entirely.
No, it's
Do they not
fine.
listen?
I hope they do listen.
Okay. Well, it's a good birthday present.
Anyway,
and
Ben, you
testing
keep
one.
talking. I think leave it in. They won't listen.
Damning indictment of our listenership. Ben?
yes.
your trip?
Sorry. Wait. What do you want me to talk about? Me personally, or just some
I
generic
know.
stuff?
Yeah, go for it.
So
Yeah, where are
I
you going
was-
in Italy?
I saw an article this morning that was saying that obviously it's been increased to highly likely in the UK. So they've said that widespread transmission of it's highly likely now, and
Yeah.
that the number of UK cases has increased to 36. And there's also apparently going to be a special programme on tonight at 7:30.
Very
Where?
exciting. Very exciting.
When did this turn into a TV
I know.
guide? What's the programme?
I don't know. It said a panel of experts and BBC reporters will
I
be
like how
answering
angry
your
you've got.
questions
Shitting
about the corona outbreak in a special programme on BBC One.
That's how ambiguous this is. There is a TV program on. I'm
On
not
BBC
sure
One,
what
we
it
got a
is.
channel.
Oh, BBC One.
Well,
we have
well,
BBC
Well,
One.
no, I mean it's
Okay.
one of those. I presume it's one of those ones where they answer questions from the public about what they think about it. So,
Yeah, that is what a panel of experts does.
well, yeah, exactly. But when you say
Sorry,
we
I don't
have
know
no
why-
details
Yeah,
on the
it's so
show,
angry.
I'm
It's
just
got so
saying that that's not the
confrontational.
case.
Did remember that you see Trump called it a Democrat hoax? Or,
No.
Well,
What?
that's a sort of maybe an unfair misquoting. But
Okay.
he compared it. He gave a long
It's an
list
exciting
of
misquotation,
Democrat
though.
hoax. Yeah, exactly. And he said like, oh, first they had Russia, then they had the
Oh.
impeachment thing. Now they have this coronavirus.
I mean, there's not really even a link between those.
I know,
Because like two are political and one is like.
it was off the cuff, so it was obviously not a prepped.
I mean, he's also been like pretty big downplayer of it, like in recent days. Like even when it comes to like the economy and stuff, which we obviously made a video about, came out of the weekend. But just the fact that he was blaming other factors, which sure you can't say like the whole downturn is based entirely on the coronavirus, but most economists are saying like it's definitely the primary reason. But it's interesting that he's like decided to kind of downplay that, and whether that's economic or just generally.
It's interesting that he knows that even though it's obviously not his fault, it will affect him politically. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like with the economic downturn, someone like Johnson's not going to say they're just taking on the chin. They'd be like, this is an event. I can't control this. And he's very aware that that large contingent of his voting base just votes for him because they think it'd be great with the economy.
Yeah, and when if he ends up
even
not
if it's
being,
not his fault entirely.
Well, equally you could say the same thing. A lot of his growth you could attribute to like underlying trends rather than anything great he's done.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like the swings and roundabouts of that. And we did actually discuss this, shouting out another video. In the video we did on Trump's economy on the US channel, we discussed how
that's not going in. That little click.
That click
at
is
the
going
camera.
in 100%. And cut into it too. On the US channel, we discussed the fact that often re-election campaigns are really focused around economy, and it's when you have poor economies that people don't get re-elected.
Yeah.
So if this was to be a longer running issue, it could become a problem for Trump. Who knows? He's such an unusual politician generally. Like, all the other rules have been broken. Who knows what this one will be too. Interesting, the World Health Organization hasn't defined it as a pandemic yet.
Not yet.
Despite the fact that a definition of a pandemic is a large outbreak of a disease affecting the whole world, which arguably we are at or certainly getting close to.
I think it has affected the whole world, has it?
A lot of the world. I don't think it has to be like literally every country. It's not like ticking them off the list on Wikipedia. Allegedly, from various speculation and stuff, the reasons they haven't done this is because as soon as it's labelled as a pandemic, that induces a lot of kind of like panic, frightens people.
Surely there were like government reactions.
And
as well,
apparently there's a
protocols
big thing
and
with
stuff,
insurance payouts as well.
Ah, interesting.
Because some people have cover in their insurance that covers pandemics. Although I was listening to LBC and they were saying you've got to check that because in the last few years apparently some insurance companies have been writing that off and like not including that. So I think in if you class it as a pandemic, I think it does something with the insurance claims. So I think that's another interesting factor. Yeah.
And also, apparently, the definition of pandemic kind of historically suggests that it can't be contained any further, and it is just going to continue spreading.
Yeah.
Which obviously they're hoping isn't the case with coronavirus at this point.
Yeah.
Another interesting concept, not sure if you're familiar with as like the term or like the idea at all, but the idea of flattening the curve, which is like the main objective of the World Health Organization at the moment.
Oh, you mean as in like the curve of how many
pretty much
people?
So when you have this kind of outbreak, you normally see either like one of two things happening or kind of between the two. And it's either a big spike at the beginning that drops off pretty quickly because it's not being very well maintained. There's not much being put in the way of the virus's spread, but it drops off fairly quickly because it's reached maximum like infectiousness.
Yeah.
It's got all the people it can get in the area.
Infectiousness is the medical term.
It is the medical term. I've heard all the doctors use it. Or you have the other option, which is what flattening the curve is, which is where it never reaches the same peak because you're limiting it, but it lasts a lot longer because it's like being dragged out because it's being limited and like But the benefit of that obviously is that you have longer to develop kind of like cures. You got longer to like handle individual patients. You've not like got 10,000 people turning up all at once, or maybe you still do, but like it's less extreme than if millions of people caught it in one day. So the idea is the World Health Organization are trying to limit it. They're trying to flatten the curve so that
it does look like the curve is flattening as well.
Yeah, it does.
There's a really good site for anyone to see it. There's a John Hopkins have like an interactive like data site thing.
Okay.
Which has like all the data you could hope for, and it's constantly updated. Yeah, it's quite cool.
Sounds pretty good. Interesting on the idea of flattening the curve, though. China is starting to open up some of their restrictions in the last few days, and are going to continue to, obviously, because they can't keep everything closed forever in like the affected areas. And there's a certain amount of concern there could be a second wave after the first one, because obviously people are going to start going back to transport, to schools, to factories, etc. Anything else from you, Ben, on this topic?
No, not really. I mean, I saw a weird headline this morning, which was because they have those BBC News like live feeds where they have all the things posted as it was going through. One of the things on there was just the headline was "Don't touch Peter Andre," and I didn't understand at all what that was.
That's genuine advice.
Good advice.
Yeah,
coronavirus or not,
but it was apparently it was to do with the coronavirus, and apparently management had said at one of his concerts not to touch him, and then he was hugging and like not take selfies was the point. Like, don't go up to him and try and hug him and take selfies.
I've got a photo of the notice that was put up at like his concert, whatever he's doing, I guess. which is notice. Due to recent events of coronavirus, please do not have any physical contact with Peter Andre. Please do not take any selfies with Peter Andre. Apologies for any inconvenience. Thank you.
That sort of juxtaposition between Peter Andre and a pandemic
I
is
know.
so funny.
It's just it was a weird thing to happen, yeah. But also, kind of semi-linked to that, there was a lot of talk about if this continues, there's a big risk that it would affect the UK festival industry over summer.
Yeah.
So because we're getting close to there, there's a lot of talk about, especially Glastonbury was the big one that they were talking about, and obviously a lot of people in a small area. And that being affected or having to be
outside
cancelled.
sanitary,
Yeah. So there's a lot of talk about how that would affect, and obviously the impact that would have, because the amount of revenue that brings in and everything else. It's there's a lot of
big
talk
deal.
about that. Yeah.
All right, should we do Keir Starmer?
Yes.
let's do Keir Starmer.
Or Labour leadership more generally.
Labour leadership.
Labour
but
leadership.
Keir Starmer.
But Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer. In the Patreon bonus section of this episode, we discussed Johnson's announcement of his engagement and upcoming baby. And I think we also annoy Ben a little bit.
Look, oh no, I'm not talking about the stuff that I'm talking about. Isn't the friggin' baby?
No, I want to hear about the baby.
Why are you getting so stressed about
Tell
the
me all
baby?
the stats about the baby.
It's just a baby.
Okay,
Do you
well,
reckon
look,
it's going to be a boy or a girl, Ben?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Guess.
Boris wants to have
guess.
a baby.
Go
He's
on, guess.
also
Guess.
he's
Guess.
also
Guess.
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 not guessing.
And on top of that, Zach tells a story that absolutely can't be broadcast.
I've not quite met, but I've bumped into his son a couple of times.
Amazing.
I'm going to cut this out of the podcast.
No, you're not.
This is going out. No, that bit can stay in.
Okay.
I'm not joking. There's a famous story about. This is so posh. This makes me sound like bullying the.
Wow.
Wow. Anyway, that is not going
Ben
in.
wants that left in.
Let's start again.
I don't know who you. I don't want to know.
To hear the full Patreon exclusive section of the podcast, be sure to sign up to our Patreon. You can find it at patreon.com/TLDR news. Okay, so Labour obviously currently having their leadership contest. They're battling it out to become the new leader. We've got 3 people still in the race. Those are Keir Starmer, Rebecca Long-Bailey, and Lisa Nandy. We can go through some of the stats in a minute, but we've got a video out on this coming soon.
Have we?
Promo. Yeah, we do.
Oh.
So if you want to learn more about each of the candidates individually, their history, what they stand for, that'd probably be the best place to go. I mean, we'll probably talk about it here too, so do what you want. So, Labour's leadership battle.
It's not much of a battle anymore.
No, not really. Do you want some stats? Should we drop
Yeah,
right
you know
Go
what, let's
on,
get them out
go on,
now,
Jack, do it.
and we'll-
If you're looking at constituency party nominations, which obviously was the process that's already happened, not entirely representative, but Starmer got 58.4% of votes, Nandy got 11.3, Long Bailey 25.5. So it seems like he has a pretty decent lead. Some polling suggests that it might not be quite so comfortable for him. We discussed it before, but the Survation polling from Labour List suggests that Long Bailey has a 2-point lead, 51-49.
Survation did do a new poll though.
They did.
Not with Labour List members,
Okay.
not specific, and they found it was something like 45% Starmer, 34% Bailey, and the rest Nandy. But obviously,
Which fits with what I was saying.
yeah,
pretty
Lisa
broadly.
Nandy's second preference votes.
Well, that's the thing. Is the way that the Labour system works is if there's no leader in the first preference, last place is knocked out, and then they're reassigned second preference. So it's a question of where do, let's be honest, Lisa Nandy's votes end up going, because she's probably going to be knocked out in the first round.
And they do go to Starmer. You know, politically more aligned than Nandy and Long Bailey are. So it makes sense.
Still got a while to wait. I think, and we can discuss this in a second, but I think it's slightly problematic how long this has been going on for.
Oh, yeah, it's so boring.
Yeah.
It's boring, but also just like holding people's attention and like making people care. I mean, not everyone needs to be invested in politics the same way we are, but the ballot still doesn't close for another month today exactly.
And also, it might already
and the
be
results
done.
aren't for another month and 2 days. The 4th of April they come out.
Yeah, because most people vote early. Most of the
Yes.
Labour membership vote early. There's a chance that enough people have already voted for Starmer
That it's a done deal.
It's a done deal, and it is a done deal. I saw that one of them, like Betfred or Paddy Power,
Yes.
have already started paying out on
Yeah,
their,
they have. Yeah.
Really?
yeah, on a bet for Keir Starmer. If you bet for Keir Starmer to be next Labour leader,
Wow. Check your
Yeah.
account now. You could already be paid.
yeah, you do.
Yeah.
That's really confident. So how do we feel about the process? What do we think about the potential result?
Ben, any big thoughts?
Yeah, well, I read an article in The Spectator which was just about what a Keir Starmer leadership would look like, because obviously we talk a lot about the leadership, you know, election and the candidates and who's more likely to win. But I think there's not been much talk about the candidates and what they would actually do as leader. And I don't know if this was just quite a biased Spectator piece or something, but it was basically saying that he doesn't seem to commit to anything really at the minute. He seems to be... There's got a lot of people from all over the political, like the Labour broad church membership working on his campaign. So it says like his supporters range from unashamed Blairites to a Momentum organiser and a retired Corbyn cheerleader. The phrases that it uses. So he's got like a lot of people from all over working on his campaign, and he's saying that he's not yet committed himself to a faction within the Labour Party. And they're saying that is that to try and like unite the party, and is he going to come down when he becomes leader to being part of one of those factions, or is he going to try and be that moderate? And the thing to bear in mind, I think, is that, you know, I remember at the time of the election last year, we were talking about that stat that was if Johnson holds out till 2024, the only Labour leader to have won an election in the last 50 years will have been Tony Blair. That will have been the only person. Yeah. So there's then the discussion about, is, you know, you trying to unite the party a good thing, or has politics changed, and do you need to commit yourself to one side? It's quite an interesting one.
I think I wouldn't necessarily want to comment on the biasness of the article, having not read it. I don't want to judge a Spectator on that. Yeah. I mean, I think I probably can, but I'm not going to. But I think it's probably generally true. I think he's definitely tried to appeal to a wide range of people. He hasn't quite gone down the same narrow path some of the other candidates did and have. I think he certainly appeals to a wider group than some of the other candidates. Yeah, he's continued to defend. Yeah, he's continued to defend a lot of Corbyn's 2019 manifesto, while also talking about other priorities. So I think he's got a balance of like, he certainly is more centrist than someone like Long Bailey or Corbyn, but I think he's certainly trying to appear more left than I think some people are kind of recognizing.
It'll be interesting to see how much of that is a show and how much of it is genuine, because so far he's done remarkably well. It's sort of two things. There's one is holding that coalition where kept enough Corbynites obviously on side, and then also trapped all the Blairites with him as well. And that's why he's winning by such a massive majority in all the polls. But also he's managed to get away with not actually that many media appearances. Like he hasn't been out there doing big flash media appearances. And it's the same thing with Johnson when he won. He wasn't out there doing media appearances, and it seemed to work fine for him. He seemed to just basically, he knew how to lead to begin with. You play as sort of soft a hand as possible and let the momentum take you. And,
which probably is a pretty decent strategy.
Yeah, but people thought it wouldn't work for Johnson. You know what I mean? People thought you'd face some punishment, like Theresa May did for not turning up to debates and stuff. Yeah. And it's the same. He hasn't not turned up to debates, but like, you know what I mean? He's not all over the front pages and stuff like that. But I think his aspiration is to try and maintain that broad church. Yeah, so instead of committing in the end to the Blairite fact, I think he's hoping that he can do the whole, like, you know, we've got to be a new sort of a new version of Labour that incorporates both those sort of like hardcore Momentum fans and the sort of like metropolitan elite university educated.
Which is something, and I mean, I know I've already spoken about Blair, but if we go back a bit further, which is something that I think Harold Wilson was quite famous for, is trying to bring the party together and try and unite the different factions within the party. And there is like a Labour tradition there of leaders trying to keep this very broad church party together. You know, there are leaders that haven't done that and have tried to...
I think Blair is actually the best example, though, because so Blair in 1996 did want to form a coalition with the Lib Dems, and had he not got such a stonking great majority, he always had the dream of that sort of like the soft left coalition and how that could dominate British politics for years, and then he got a massive majority and decided he didn't need the Lib Dems. And then post Iraq he couldn't join up with the Lib Dems. And I think that's interesting because he gave that speech, but he refused to endorse any of the candidates because he knows that he's a bit toxic. So no one really wants to be endorsed by Blair.
I mean, fair,
and he sort of had 3 points. And the first one was, I don't think he said it explicitly, but there has some sort of Liberal Labour coalition has to happen if they want to win, which I think is an interesting point. And then he said 2 other things. One was about the cul-de-sac of identity politics. How Labour can't go down that route. And what was the last one? The last one was that Labour needs a new narrative, given how literally Labour is changing in the 21st century, and how there is no longer that correlation between Labourers and you know, lefties. And
totally.
Frankly, he's right about that, because the Conservatives have done quite a nice job of monopolising the centre right to right of British politics, whereas it does look like at the moment, at least, Labour and Lib Dems are quite split. Like they have split the centre-left vote in the UK because of the way first past the post works. Like, you're just sort of dicking each other.
That happens. Yeah. How do we think he would do versus Johnson in an election, say 2024? Yeah.
How speculative do you want to be, Jack? That's like very years
very
away.
Speculative.
I like Starmer. I think Starmer beats Johnson.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. I think I was reading something that was interesting that was saying the contrast in their personalities will be interesting.
Yeah.
Because you've got one who is all about rhetoric and hyperbole, and everyone kind of appreciates that and knows that when you're hearing it from Johnson. And it's not even a really insult to say that. It's just like, that's his vibe. Whereas Starmer is like a former lawyer, very straight.
He's very details heavy as well.
Exactly. So it'll be interesting, especially in a post-Brexit world, that if things haven't gone as Johnson promised, if things haven't gone as well as he hoped, will someone who's more detail-oriented, more like focused on what the reality of situations is, will that appeal to people as like a breath of fresh air from Johnson, Trump, all those kind of characters?
It is interesting how the main parties have sort of like rebalanced. Do you know what I mean? Like Labour had their Corbyn phase.
Yeah.
And now chances are we're going to go, Starmer's quite a bog standard, like 2005 sort of politician. And he might, so the odds on favourite for his Shadow Chancellor are Ed Miliband and Yvette Cooper.
I saw that.
We're going to go literally back to Ed Miliband. And the same thing with Johnson. Like the Conservative Party went through like a slightly weird phase where Jacob Rees-Mogg and Mark Francois and sort of Nigel in a way were the big face of the Conservative Party. It looks like it was going to be crushed by the Brexit Party. And it was swaying a little bit further right than most people thought it should be, flirting with the no-deal Brexit. And now look, we have Johnson, the same bloke as, 10 years ago, leading it up. We've got Johnson and Miliband.
No, it's true. It's interesting. It'll be, as you say, Ben, it's crazy to speculate quite that far ahead.
Yes.
But no, it's interesting to look at as like, because that is their biggest challenge, is if they then don't win in 2024, will Starmer ever do anything really, like, besides lead the shadow government? But it'll be interesting because 2029, let's say, I mean, who knows? Because
away,
there've been like 24 elections in the last 10 minutes. So
it's
who knows if we're actually talking that far away. But say we're talking that far away, you're probably thinking another leader by that point. So it's interesting how much impact Starmer will actually have on the whole thing.
And as I've said before, and I'll keep saying, it's the which directions the Labour Party going in from now is going to be the really interesting thing. Is it going to try and what used to be called modernising and bringing it back to the centre ground? Is it going to become more ideological? That's the thing that I think is going to be so interesting to look at over the next few years and see like the direction of where the Labour Party is going, because 10, 20 years ago you would have thought that is the Labour Party now, is that they're what was called modernising and going to the centre ground, and then that was undone. And are we going to go back to that? Are we going to stay ideological? Like, it's quite an interesting thing to see happen. Certainly an interesting thing to look at over the next few years, see where Labour goes. I do think that my best prediction for it, I think there'll be a couple of like token Corbynite policies.
Yeah.
There'll be stuff like, try and big corporation tax, maybe something like that. Mm-hmm. And then I think the rest of it will sort of sway back to.
Well, he's already committed to keeping the abolition of tuition fees, and he wants to have a programme of mass nationalisation. And he wants something called the Prevention of Military Intervention Act to end illegal wars, which I presume is to try and get rid of that like Blair legacy of Iraq. So he's already committed to certain like Corbyn policy, like abolishing tuition fees and
but I think those are Corbyn policies, but they are also notably policies that poll well.
Yeah,
like rail nationalisation famously polls well even with Conservative voters, and tuition fees, as we've done on one of our very good videos. I like looking to the camera.
Did you write that one, Zach, by any chance?
I'm sure they'll like it too.
I did write that one.
I thought you might have.
But it's
a very good one. Who else could have written it?
Thank you very much.
Ooh.
Yeah, sassy.
No, I'm joking. Let's hope none of our writers watch this. I'm entirely joking. I looked at the camera too.
Look at the camera. I think that's what we'll see. We'll return to sort of a bit more. He'll be far more sensitive to popular public opinion as opposed to the opinions of the selectorate that is the Labour membership compared to Corbyn.
But to be fair, as Ben says, he's definitely defended quite a lot of 2019 policies. He's said, just quoting from our own video here, that Labour shouldn't lose sight of its core values and shouldn't retreat from the radicalism of the last few years.
But what I mean. That's like
it's
Blairite speak.
Statement.
That's like
totally.
Radicalism, but we're
True,
we're so radical in how centrist we are.
Yeah.
The only thing I was going to say is that I think the one thing that might really sway him to the centre is the fact that I do think that the Corbynite wing, they will react badly if he sort of betrays them, if he doesn't go through with the sort of maintaining the Corbynite radicalism that he's just said he would. And I think we saw this you see that Rebecca Long Bailey has started slightly, they're normally quite cordial towards each other. And
it's been pretty civil.
It has been very civil, but she has upped the ante and she's started sort of implying that he is funded by dark money interests and big donors. And she's published I think this is worth clearing out because she published all her donations above £1,500.
Yeah.
And Starmer hasn't done it immediately, but the proper parliamentary procedure is that you publish them in what's called the parliamentary interest list.
Yeah.
And that comes out on Monday. There is that tension building, and that Rebecca Long Bailey and co, even if they lose, are still going to be a little bit catty about it.
But I think you can see that in like the growth of like momentum and just the general left, or certainly how visible they are. It wouldn't be surprising if that doesn't go away.
Of course.
It would be more surprising if it did go
That's
away.
why it's sort of trivial. I just think we've seen a little bit of it already, that's all. Let's talk about Heathrow.
I feel like, Zach, this is going to be one of your like niches that you've just like read every like briefing paper and everything
Yeah,
on.
it 100% is.
I actually haven't. I haven't read any of the briefing papers.
He's a big old Heathrow boy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
What do you think my opinion on Heathrow is?
Are you pro third? Actually, we'll leave this. Right, we'll do this in the thing.
No.
We can keep this, and this could be the start.
This is
frankly.
the start.
This
Yeah.
is the start.
Me accusing Zach of being a big Heathrow boy.
It's because
is
I
where
have the
it
whole
begins.
big HS2 thing. I love HS2. I
You
think
just
Heathrow
love
is...
infrastructure and transport.
I do, and I should
TLDR
really...
transport, new channel.
Frankly, I should do more research on Heathrow, but I'm not that intrigued about it, mainly because of the environmental arguments. And
So you're anti?
I'm sort of anti it, but
Okay.
only sort of broad stroke.
I would agree. Anyway, so the news from Heathrow is last week the Court of Appeal blocked the moves for a third runway on the basis of climate, noise and air pollution, saying that in the light of the Paris Climate Agreement, they hadn't taken into account enough of the impact along those lines. The government has already said they're not going to appeal the decision, but ultimately it's a private issue anyway because it's an issue between the owners of Heathrow and the courts. So just because the government says they're not going to press it any further doesn't mean this is the end of the whole situation. It's been something that's been in the works for honestly 30, 40 years at this point. There's been talk of expanding further. And to be fair, when you compare it to other major airports in the world, 2 runways is nothing. Especially when you're talking about big hub airports, especially for an island nation. It is pretty crazy that we're doing it with 2 at the moment.
I should do some more reading on this. It sounds interesting.
Are you interested by my summary?
You've piqued my interest. Look at that.
There's a major economic argument for it. That is the fact that we're only using 2. And also, arguably, I think Heathrow is one of the world's busiest airports when you work out by runways, the number of flights taking off per runway. So it's we're already doing a load of pollution, way more than some other people are, even though we've got less runways, sorry. So, I mean, obviously, if you had another runway, it's not you're just spreading it out. You're obviously going to increase. Someone who is overly passionate about the issue is Boris Johnson.
He is.
Who, for a long time, since his old mayor days, has been very against Heathrow, possibly because also his constituency is very
absolutely.
Nearby. I think that probably helps. Famously, he said that he'd lie in front of the bulldozers if they started building the third runway, and during the general election, he stepped that back a bit, saying he'd probably find another way of solving the issue, which I think is quite funny. As if anyone believed he was actually going to lie in front of the diggers originally.
What a sight that would be, though.
It would be really, I mean...
I'm sort of mumbling his way. I'm very sorry. And just straight out in front of them.
But it's interesting as well how this is kind of the best news for Johnson possible. I think it ties
absolutely.
together because he's been a long-term opponent, so going back on that is obviously problematic. But building another runway fits with his economic and Brexit agenda fairly well. So it's kind of the clash of those 2 things. This is a nice excuse. He can blame the courts on the fact that it's been stopped for the people who want the expansion, and he can be a hero for the people who don't want the expansion. And if they did appeal, at that point it's a private issue. The government aren't doing it, so he can say it's between the private company and the courts. It's nothing to do with me. And then even if it does go through and people blame him, it was the May government that started all this anyway. So he can say it started before. So kind of no matter how this goes from here, he's won out of this.
Also, he still gets to be the big infrastructure guy because he has HS2. I feel like HS2, it was a one of the 2 sort of thing. You know
they're
what I mean?
both controversial.
Both big controversial infrastructure products. He's picked one. He's already the big infrastructure guy.
Yeah.
You know?
And his bridge.
Which is not going to happen, but his bridge.
Good video, though.
Yeah, no, well done, Jack.
Thanks.
Nice.
Did that all by myself.
Well done.
Thanks. I'm always quite proud of myself. Sometimes I think at the end of videos, we have like the credits.
Yeah.
The way you can tell if I've done all of it is because there isn't a credit section, because I never put it in. Because otherwise it's like written by Jack Kelly, voiced by Jack Kelly, animated by Jack Kelly.
Jack Kelly is amazing.
Yeah, I can't do that. So if you ever don't see a credit section at the end, it's because I did it all. That's me taking credit for it retroactively.
Well done.
You're welcome.
Where the government wasn't going to challenge the court case, but Heathrow itself was. So I think that this isn't completely over yet. I think they're going to appeal the ruling. As I say, the government have already said that they're not going to, though. But I was reading quite a lot this morning about it, and climate activists saying that this is like a precedent that climate law can actually like influence and can impact domestic politics. So I think that was one of the big like outcomes of this. Was as you said, it was ruled out on the basis that the Paris Climate Accords weren't taken into account when making the decision. So it's
and I think this could be wrong, but I think it's the first time the Paris Climate Accords have ever really come to any major, any major change. Maybe it shaped government policy in some countries, but it's one of the first times where it's been cited as the reason why something's been blocked. So interesting that it is clearly making a genuine impact.
If it's used in the future and more, we'll find out how restrictive those sort of like airy-fairy government targets. When they say stuff like we're going net zero by 2050, or they also have the thing about the cars. We've seen that they're getting rid of all diesel cars
and petrol. It will only be electric,
exactly.
or
Only
maybe
electric
hybrid
cars by 2035.
Which is pretty soon.
Which is quite soon. And I think, assuming these now carry, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't know the legalities behind it. But if these start carrying legal ways, they will put restrictions on what the government can and can't do. Which makes sense. Logically, you can't sincerely, in good faith, commit to net zero by 2050 and then also plow ahead with all your expensive carbon polluting stuff.
To be fair, Transport Minister commented when he was commenting on it, saying that the government weren't going to continue and they weren't going to repeal. One of his points was that it doesn't really fit and they didn't really consider the 2050 targets in the original proposal. So they clearly are at least trying to make it look like they care about it. I don't want to comment on like whether they genuinely do, but it clearly is part of their thinking in this. The reason why the target is 2050 rather than 2022 or something is because it's going to take a long time.
Boris Johnson probably won't be Prime Minister.
Also that.
You never know, though.
Unlike,
anti-aging techniques have come a long way.
Who knows? Yeah, can you imagine? That's a long time to be Prime Minister. But even still, it's like you've got to start phasing this in now, and doing something that's completely counter to the main objective of the plan is like, you can't be doing that, especially considering they just made the plan to like give the target and then like 2 months later, give this the go-ahead would be a little insane. But even still, I'm slightly surprised that it was blocked.
Yeah, so am I. It doesn't feel... I think we're all surprised because it's a new precedent that no one really saw coming.
Yeah.
And we still feel like, for lack of a better term, like the establishment, the courts, the government treats environmental targets as just sort of like flimsy things you can throw out and sound good about, but you don't have to follow through with. And it's interesting to see that maybe they actually do now have to follow through with them. I mean, that'd be great, wouldn't it? So,
actually follow targets.
Yeah, and not just put bullshit on posters and go with it.
It's interesting as you say, because like nearly always economy takes precedence over environmental issues, and as I say, there is a genuine economic case to be made for it. And when I say that I'm like broadly in favour of it being blocked, that is because there is the genuine case. I can see the other side of the argument. So it's interesting that that's being ignored in favour of the environmental case. As you say,
I didn't think about this until we were just talking about it there, but it is... You were saying that it is in line with this whole sort of infrastructure post-Brexit thing, but notably it is very much a southern thing.
Yes,
it's a sort of West London southern thing. So I suppose it's HS2 makes more sense. You've got to pick one of the two.
We're going to see some airport up north get like 15 new runways next week.
It's just sorry. I just remembered this. I was reading around the Heathrow thing this morning. I think I stumbled across their defense of it or something. The Heathrow's defense of them trying to build the third runway and everything, and building their case on it. And I remember them saying something along the lines of like, the compulsory purchase orders. So they have to. They apparently they were planning to take out an entire village. So it's just an entire village would just be bought. And they were saying that they'd offer full market value plus 25% and all this. And they were saying that we're going to buy the village. But and they had to reroute the M25. So apparently where they want to build it, the M25 was going through. So just for people who don't know, the M25 is the motorway that runs around London in like a circle. And they were saying that they'd have to build a tunnel that will go under the runway for the M25. And the amount of stuff that they'd have to, like, you know, buying a village, building a tunnel for the M25 to go through. Then there's all of the displacement of animals and everything that they have to take into account. Like, there's a lot of stuff to consider here. It's kind of weird, like, not in a bad way, just it's a weird thing to think about, that it's all of that's been stopped on climate grounds. It's weird that's how this has come about. It's just, so really, as you were saying about it being unexpected, that's why it's so unexpected to me, is that they've put, there's all this work that's gone into it, and then it's climate stopped. And as I say, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, it's just unexpected.
That was Heathrow.
That was Heathrow. There's not much to say about Heathrow.
Quite a nice airport.
It's quite nice that it's happened now.
What's your favourite UK airport?
Well, London City is obviously.
Okay, I've never been.
Oh, it's just ridiculous.
Were you here when we talked about this the other day?
No.
I kind of object to London City, like, on obvious grounds. I don't really need to justify. Like, it's obviously bad. It's like the root of all evil.
What's your main objection to London City?
Just like,
it's so impractical. It's so like a business. Like, it's just for convenience. Like, we plonk an airport.
It's like
in the middle
so
of
unnecessary. But I mean, that's why I've never flown from it. Like, even though it's been an option, I'd be like,
it is becoming less and less necessary. We can plonk this in the end of Heathrow as well, as airport chat.
Yeah.
Given that how like good the links are, like, you can just Piccadilly line to Heathrow. I love it.
True.
And like now, you know, even if you are a businessman,
Yeah.
Central London is probably depending on where you are, obviously, but it's not hard to get to Heathrow at all.
Well, I mean, the Heathrow Express is so convenient.
Yeah,
and
Gatwick
so
Express, and you got the Stansted Express. You got all
so many
stuff.
expresses.
So many expresses.
Stansted's probably one of the worst airports.
I hate Stansted.
Stansted and Luton.
Luton's
Luton's worse.
Oh God,
Both
Luton
garbage.
I'd really like
Gatwick,
to join in this conversation,
Gatwick's
but I
like my
really
local
can't.
airport.
Sorry.
Go on, tell us about what East Midlands Parkway. No, that's the train station.
No, that's East Midlands Airport.
East Midlands, whatever it's called.
It was good. It's good.
Great
Well, it's
airport.
tiny. It's got. I've flown there once, and there's a cafe that did bottomless tea, and I didn't realise I bought a bottomless tea, and I had about 7 cups
world.
before going for basically £2. And
Were you just
very
in a
happy.
Wetherspoons or something?
No, it's like a real fancy place. It was nice.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I mean, you quite like buzzed up on caffeine then. 7 cups of tea, like. Before
Well, I had
flight.
I flew like a week before exams, so the flight was at 9, so I was there at about 6. And I got loads. I did like 2 hours work before like 8 a.m. before I'd even got on the plane. It was amazing.
Productive.
That is good, I suppose. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And that was your weekly airport chat. Tune in next week for more.
In the last week, Philip Rutnam is the chief civil servant for the Home Office, resigned. And not just resigned, he's also making a claim against the government for constructive dismissal. And he put out a pretty explosive statement. Do you see the statement?
Yeah.
Oh, it was big. It was big.
It was explosive.
It was as explosive as chief civil servant statements get.
Yeah, I mean, low bar.
Yeah, and he was saying, I think the implication was that actually Priti Patel knew about the briefings that were going on against him.
Yeah.
So there had been sort of reports and briefings and papers and political journals about how civil servants, especially those in the Home Office, were being unhelpful, and sort of there was tension between them and the government.
Yeah.
Philip Rutnam seems to suggest that he thought Priti Patel, who's obviously Home Secretary, knew about these briefings, and he resigned on those grounds. He's essentially implying that there's some sort of like orchestrated government conspiracy against him and other civil servants, which is sort of true. There has infamously recently did you hear about this, the shit list?
No.
So the government has a list of, I think it must be leaked, a list of 3 top civil servants that they really don't like. Philip Rutnam was one of them.
Yeah.
They had 3 people that they want to get rid of, and one of them has obviously gone. And it is pretty big news.
Because you can't just get rid of civil servants just for people who aren't aware. They can't be just got rid of. So the fact that he's kind of been pushed out is controversial in itself.
You can move them around from department to
Sure.
department. So that's what probably would have happened. What would have happened is at the end of their tenure or whatever they have, whatever the cycle is, you would just move them to some other less important department.
Yeah.
And he also, when he resigned, Philip Rutnam also made claims of bullying against Priti Patel. So there were 2 things there. One, he said that essentially the government was also taking an attack against him, and 2, that Priti Patel was a bully towards other civil servants in the Home Office.
Both controversial.
Yeah, both big, both pretty controversial claims. I think the bullying thing, you can't really say much about it because there's just not enough evidence for either side. And to pick
Or
a
we're certainly
side.
not aware of it.
Yeah, pick a side feels like a sort of a personal attack on someone.
Yeah.
But the sort of briefings against him point interesting that he's taken such a drastic step, because there has been tension between like the civil servants and the government and Dominic Cummings and co for like ages. But something must have really stepped it up for him to quit.
Yeah, definitely.
That's sort of been a given. That's what's been in the news like non-stop. There's just been, since about Brexit day one, there's sort of been like civil servants in the Treasury are putting out doomsday Brexit forecasts, and there's been that sort of whinging non-stop, and something must have kicked up a notch.
Yeah, something's changed.
Yeah, something's changed, and we don't know what it is entirely.
And we might do with this claim going ahead. We're likely to. Well,
what it is.
Whether we will find out, I guess, is a question. But it's certainly being investigated.
Yeah,
and it could potentially impact Priti Patel's position too, depending on what the revelations are.
The unfortunate thing for Priti Patel is that with the whole reshuffle, she has actually lost a lot of her SPADs. So she, at the moment, is
special advisors.
Yeah, is pretty isolated in the Home Office, especially post Johnson reshuffle. So she lost her special advisors in that, and now she has the unfortunate position of being in the Home Office without many mates.
Yeah.
So, there you go.
Difficult position.
Yeah, it's a difficult position.
Unless she's a bully.
Unless she's a bully, in which case you deserve it, Priti.
We're not commenting.
There's only one more thing I would say, is that there's constant conflation in the media. God, I sound like one of those, like, a Breitbart commentator. But there is a real conflation in the media where lots of people are saying, essentially, that he was rubbish anyway, so it's fine that he went, because he was presiding over the Home Office for the whole Windrush scandal. And obviously Amber Rudd lost her job for that, because we were deporting people. But most people think that obviously it wasn't Amber Rudd's fault personally, like it was the fault of the Home Office at large, and he is the person in control of the Home Office, realistically. Amber Rudd is essentially just a government minister who comes to fill in for a couple of years. He knows the ins and outs better than she does, and he should have been aware of this. But that he was crap then doesn't somehow justify what's happened now, essentially. That perhaps he should have been sacked back when Amber Rudd was sacked. Doesn't mean that Priti Patel isn't a bully, or that there aren't also attacks against civil servants going on. And that's the only minor issue I have about the way this has been reported, which is sort of like, who cares? He should have gone anyway. It's like, well, if it was just that he was crap and he's gone now, then perhaps we wouldn't care. But he's gone for very specific reasons, and they're unrelated to the Windrush scandal.
Totally.
So that's my only qualm about it.
It'll be interesting how it develops, really.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all kicks off. It'll be interesting to see how that whole civil service government relationship develops.
It's certainly
generally.
very tense at the moment.
Yeah.
It couldn't get a lot worse, I don't think. So it'll be interesting, definitely, especially with some of the reshuffles and changes that Cummings wants to make. If any of those come to bear, it'll be very interesting to see how the civil service reacts generally.
Do you want to just do a little... okay, quick. I'll go for super quick.
Fire.
Quick rant.
Final fire.
I'm sorry, guys. Super quick rant. It'll be 2 seconds. The thing at the moment is that obviously there's this tension between what the UK wants and the EU wants. I think most of it comes down to essentially regulations, and that the EU wants level playing field.
You really are going quick.
Yeah, really are.
Okay,
just going to get it all completely out of the way. EU wants level playing field, and the UK what's called non-regression, which means we're not going to go back from what we've currently got, but if you go up, we're not going to come up with you. Yeah?
Okay.
So, at the moment, that's one of the big tension points. There's a whole load of other stuff. You would have seen at the moment, there was an article in the Telegraph about how the UK, Boris Johnson stopped the Department for Health from committing to staying with the EU's pandemic protocol.
Okay.
So the EU has a pandemic protocol where they all cooperate with each other, and it's called like an early warning system or something like that. Anyway, Matt Hancock obviously said we should be getting involved, staying with this. Look at the coronavirus, like this makes sense.
Right now, it seems like an appropriate time.
And Johnson thought that it, or whoever it is in the government, thought that this would be giving too much leverage to the EU.
Wow.
So they said, no, we're not going to commit to staying with this. Potentially staying out of like a mutual pandemic response, which would save lives.
Yeah.
Just so that we can make sure we have enough Brexit leverage to get the, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, maybe that's mad, maybe that's not mad. That's what the government's chosen to do. I think it's a bit controversial.
Yeah.
But more generally, there is this massive disconnect between what the two sides want. And I think confusion is actually easily explained, because I think that essentially the EU's thinking is we are the bigger party.
Yeah.
We can do this. UK's thinking is you guys have got elections a lot sooner than we do.
Sure.
So we're also going to play hardball.
Yeah.
And I think the UK is right, actually. I think the UK wins that one, because, like Macron has an election coming up in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Like,
And in Germany too.
Exactly, and Boris Johnson has 4 years. If we crash out on a no deal, Boris Johnson has 4 years to clean it up. The rest of the EU does not have that time or that political luxury.
That's getting cut out.
I'm happy to.
Okay, I'll decide.
I'm happy to.
I'll decide in
mine.
post.
Anyway,
Cut it.
if you want a deal out of this, you actually, what did he say?
Cut it.
If you want a deal to come out of this, almost paradoxically, you should want them to have the shit fuck of all arguments straight off the mark.
Yeah.
Because there's no way of reconciling these two things at the moment. There's no way of reconciling the sort of like massive divergence Canada style thing that the UK wants and the sort of Norway-ish we're going to be mates that the EU wants, and we're going to ECJU and shit like that. So if you want a deal to come out of this, you want to find some common ground. You want them to get that out of their systems like immediately, because otherwise this is looking,
we don't have time for it. Yeah,
it looks more and more likely at the moment we're heading straight for a no deal. Because both sides think the other will chicken out first for different reasons. Anyway, let's move on. That was my little rant.
Well, they've even said, I mean, it's worth talking about the fact that the UK is allegedly willing to walk away from negotiations in summer. And their current statement basically is that if they don't have like everything kind of sorted by June, and it's not possible that will all get signed off by September, then they're willing to decide if the UK would be better spending its time.
Such a sassy letter.
I know. Better spending its time like handling with domestic
things.
issues. So to like make sure we're ready for a no deal rather than trying to get a deal. Who knows whether that actually sticks to that? Is that just a point in the negotiating documents? Is it a genuine threat? It's kind of hard to tell at this point. But it's interesting that the UK is even toying with the idea of giving up on negotiations, which is something that was hard to see the May government doing.
I thought we should have talked about this. This is definitely worth talking about.
You enjoyed this?
Yeah, I just think it's mad that we're actually going to end up, like everyone said Brexit is done. It's
still
so
get no
likely
deal.
we're going to get a no deal now. It's completely nuts. And also, there's going to be no parliamentary recourse. Like they can't cancel Article 50 this time round.
No,
you're just going to have
happened.
to, you jump off the cliff.
Yeah.
Bang.
31st of December.
Yeah, wild. So I think, and also we did a video on this.
Promo.
And I didn't think it got enough traction. Like people really should be more aware of how real the threat is of no deal and how
we need a video with like no deal in the title to get people's attention.
Yeah,
we'll do that soon.
We should do that and then just link it to our old video.
It's just re-upload.
Whatever it's called.
Why no deal could still happen.
Yeah.
Letters.
No, why no deal?
I love that Zach's talking about the content of this
good.
video and you're
That's
stressing
good.
about the title, Jack. I love that.
That's how this works.
title
This is the relationship.
The title is the most important thing. If people don't click on it, there's no point in us making a good video.
Why no deal is more likely than ever. We're just going to rehash the
all
trapdoor
short
trap
words
one.
too. I like that. Okay, cool. That's coming out soon then.
Nice.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Too Long Didn't Read. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get updates when they're released every week. You can also find the video version of the podcast over on the YouTube channel. That's TLDR Podcasts.